Another story that's flat on the front page concerns the Tobago Air Bridge. Apparently, LIAT is now lending assistance to Caribbean Airlines to help them service the air bridge because of everything that's been going on with the sea bridge, which to all intents and purposes can be officially labeled unreliable, although there are murmurings coming from the Port Authority that may change in the not too distant future. But on the line with us right now is the newly installed Vice President of the Tobago Chamber, Mr. Martin George. Good morning to you, Martin George.
Hi, good morning to you, Jessamy. Good morning to you, Dr. Wayne, and good morning, Edison, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Congratulations, Excellency.
Thank you very much.
Your Honor.
Martin George, are you comforted by the fact that, the air bridge is getting some support from LIAT?
Well, the thing is, the fact that they're getting some support from LIAT, I guess it's a temporary, solution to the immediate crisis and fiasco that has been created with the issue of inter-island transport. But of course, that is not a long-term solution, and we need to look at it in that context. So yes, for the immediate short term, and of course one doesn't know what is the ultimate cost to Trinidad and Tobago of this service, but the fact is you needed something urgently to be done to resolve it. So therefore, yes, if that assistance is going to make a difference, we need the help from LIAT. But the point is, we need to find long-term solutions to these problems, and these are not, this is not nuclear rocket science or microbiological engineering. These are simple issues of getting people from one place to another. You look all through Europe. Look at how they deal with it in terms of crossing all their rivers. They have ferries where they drive on their vehicles. In fact, people use that to go to work every day in many parts of Europe.
But even here in the Caribbean, even here in the Caribbean,
about half hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours, whatever. You're on the other side. You drive off. You go to work. So why are we behaving as if this is impossible? It has to be a phenomenal level of mismanagement, incompetence, and maybe possibly even corruption, because you heard the Prime Minister himself say, some months back, in terms of, issues with one of the leases of one of these vessels, that he himself was not, comfortable with the arrangements that took place. So therefore, we need to call a spade, and while we, understand the problem, we then need to say, well, okay, right, let's look at what are the solutions. And there must be, ways of looking at it from a multifaceted approach that you can go forward and say, hey, listen, all right, in addition to the traditional ferry service, what about if we have something like a seaplane service going from Port of Spain to Scarborough? You have a little seaplane that in 20 minutes can take you from Port of Spain to Scarborough. Can you think of so many companies? I mean, and I am telling you this because I am traveling on the air bridge all the time. Every week I'm there. And you know the people. You have companies that send up people to Tobago all the time for business purposes. Why must you go through the hassle of fighting up with traffic to get to Piarco, then to wait, get on a flight, land in Crown Point? Sometimes even in Tobago, just from Crown Point to Scarborough, you face traffic sometimes. When, if in fact you can take your briefcase or your little knapsack or whatever sample or product that your company is sending you to Tobago with, you hop on a seaplane right in the port of Spain, 20 minutes you're in Scarborough, you meet with your stakeholders, you meet with your clients, you get your business done, you're on a seaplane, 20 minutes, you're back in Port of Spain. Why is this not something that we are even...
Because they don't have the visionaries like yourself, Mr. George. I'm so grateful that now you're there. You and the new crew, your new team bring a new vision to Tobago, a lifeblood to Tobago. And I really, really hope, I commend you, and I really hope when I saw the news last night that you all are going to implement change. And you know it's a mountain you have to climb, because you're dealing with an ideology that's been ingrained. And I'm quoting what I heard in conversation with Dr. James. It's been there for so long, but you have to break it. You have to break it, and that's where it's at, you know. You have to break through that mindset, because we're in another age, another era, and you are right. And they're beating the old drums. It's not working. Everything has been dismantled. So we need the new visionaries. We need to stimulate the minds of the people to begin to think creatively, like you are doing. And then now you need to engage the corporate sector. The corporate sector has to get on board.
And a simple way to engage the corporate sector, you look at, say, for instance, leisure boats or party boats. Okay, if you have them outfitted properly with all the safety mechanisms, whatever, make sure they have the capacity, they can carry, they can make the journey safely, etc. They have all the safety equipment. You have some of the party boats, because some persons who are coming between Trinidad and Tobago are doing so for purposes of leisure. So if the boat takes 10 hours and it's a party boat and you're partying and you're having a great time, you don't care. You're enjoying yourself because you want to, have fun. That's your ultimate objective. So therefore, if, say, for instance, you have a few of these party boats and they are able to take maybe 500, 600 people every day, think of the load that takes off your traditional inter-island ferry service for the persons who are going for business purposes, persons who may be, transporting goods to Tobago to sell, persons who may be sending stuff down to Trinidad. So therefore, they now will use the traditional ferry services, but those who are just going for vacation or leisure purposes, then you have other options, and as you say, the private sector can be invited to be part of it. But the lead must come from the government facilitators, because once you're talking maritime laws and regulations and port operations, then obviously there's a heavy level of governmental regulations and, things that must be complied with. So therefore, you need the authorities to facilitate.
So what would be the priorities for this new chamber, Mr. George?
Well, I think, you see, first of all, if it is that you have a product and persons are not able to get to your product, to be able to, sample it, to be able to purchase it, to be able to invest in it, whatever, then you are wasting time. That's marketing 101, if you understand me.
Absolutely.
So therefore, I think the transport issue is really priority number one. You must get that done. One of the things that I have raised and I intend to continue beating a drum on is the issue that there must be a repeal of the land license regime. There must be a repeal. This is my personal view. It's something I've discussed with the other members of the executive, and it's something that I would like to see pursued as an objective. If it is that maybe for a 5-year moratorium, and then later on you say, well, okay, let's look at re-implementing at a later stage some properly phased in and structured, limits and restrictions. But I think for the immediate short term, you need an all-out repeal of the land license legislation.
Now, Mr. George, prior to your appointment and the new executive, we were hearing, as of last week, Mr. Crookrant was saying he had to go to the chamber regarding the shutdown. What has happened with that and with the changing of the guards? Has that been called off? What's the verdict?
Well, the thing is, I think we need to have some clarity, first of all, because I'm not sure that it was articulated as eloquently or as accurately as it ought to have been. The idea of the 2-day shutdown actually is not a Tobago chamber idea. It occurred at a meeting which was facilitated by the Tobago chamber. And of course, in a sense, sometimes in hindsight, when you look at how you manage these things, you ask yourself whether it was managed the way it ought to have been, because I think the spin that came out of it, it gave the public the impression that the Tobago chamber was either calling for or in support of a 2-day shutdown. It was actually a motion moved by
the truckers and traders.
Other groups, right? I think the Truckers Association who were there present. And the question was whether the Tobago Chamber as a body would be in support of it. There's supposed to be a meeting, I think sometime this week, of the management committee so that a decision can be made in that regard. But I mean, of course, one always has to analyze it. And, I mean, in terms of my personal views, I have already been very clear and very, distinct in terms of how I see this, in the sense that I can't see the utility or value in you arguing that your solution to low business would be 2 days of no business. It just makes absolutely no sense to me in terms of wrapping my head around the rationale and the motivation for calling for a shutdown. But of course, at that meeting, of course, other people will, I guess, ventilate their views and their positions to, I guess, justify their stances.
Martin George, with regard to the Sea Bridge, we hear the finance minister saying that they did their very best with regard to getting the galleon's passage. Are you satisfied with some of what you're hearing with regard to that transaction? And you would have just given a possible solution to some of the Sea Bridge issues. But apart from that, what else, what other kind of discussion should we be having in terms of sorting out the Sea Bridge once and for all?
Well, I don't think anybody who looks at it dispassionately and fairly and objectively over the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years, when you consider the operations as the Port Authority and the way procurement in terms of ferries and vessels have taken place within this little space we call Trinidad and Tobago, I don't think anybody can say that they are 100% satisfied with the process. There have been, flaws and errors littered along the way, and sometimes we seem to be compounding error on top of error on top of error. So even with this latest attempt at procurement, there are lots of questions in terms of your procurement policy, the way it was, the way the entire system, was implemented, the way things, took place. I mean, of course, you hear from the politicians their take on it, and of course they would always tell you it's the best thing since sliced bread, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So, I guess you'll have to see when it arrives here, when it gets here, when we get the true figures in terms of cost and, the value for money aspect of it, the functionality, the practicality of it, I guess then we would be able to, give some kind of final verdict. But no one can at all at this point, crow from the mountaintops and say, well, this is a perfect process and that things have been managed properly at the port at all. Nobody in their right mind could say that.
Getting back to the land license situation, Mr. George, this has been an entanglement for decades, if not centuries, as the case might be, property boundaries. How does the Chamber hope to sort of maybe intervene or whatever so people can know where their properties begin and where they end?
Okay, all right. Edison, just to eschew obfuscation, I would just want to make the distinction between land titles and the land license regime. In terms of the land license regime, we're talking about the legislation which was implemented, which required that persons who want to invest and foreigners, etc., must have a land license. So that's what I was originally speaking about. It appears what you now raising is the question of land titles in Tobago, which is another contentious issue, which needs a holistic solution and maybe a solution by legislation, because that requires us to now look at how we treat with scenarios where traditionally lots of persons in Tobago may have, had property passed, quote unquote, from generation to generation by, the elder of the family saying, well, Johnny, you take that piece by the mango tree, going down to the little river there.
You know it well.
And then, Susie, your pieces from the big stone, down to the
parlor.
And somebody move that big stone, everybody's in trouble.
I'm telling you.
A flood come and move that big stone.
You sound like a real Tobago boy there, Mr. George.
No, I'm telling you, that's exactly how it was done. We had such an interesting matter some years ago, and this one actually ended up in High Court litigation. And using the same thing, using this little river, I mean, what we call a river, as the landmark. And we were actually able to get topographical surveys, right, from the Lands and Surveys Division, which showed that over the course of maybe, like 70, 80 years, the course of the river had actually changed.
Mm-hmm.
So where the old, elder had pointed out and said, well, this is where the river is, when you look at it, you see a big, big shift. And this is just over the course of time, through erosion and, the natural water course actually had moved quite a significant distance. And that actually was the source of the problem. And it's only when we did the topographical surveys and, we got the documents from the Land and Surveys Division, and you check back and you check back and you check back, you look at the cadastrals, then you realize, you say, oh, this is where the problem is.
Wow.
So even something that they may consider as quote-unquote permanent as a river course, even that over time changes. So therefore, we need to move away from that type of, traditional, demarcation of boundaries. You must ensure that you have a survey plan with your deed. You must get a land surveyor to now come and, scientifically plot the points in a way that is objective and not subjective.
And the way objective and dealing with time, Mr. George, I know the chamber will have, the new executive will have their position on a $7 million investment by the THA to bait the Trinidad and Tobagonians to come to the Jazz Festival. Who invented that idea? And do we have the time? And how they plan to bring Trinidadians over there to recover that or recoup that $7 million investment?
Well, you see, the thing with the Jazz Festival is that it's not something one plans the same way you organize a CPEP gang to go and cut grass on the roadside. That's a much simpler operation. You round up your people, you put the little jackets on them, the little safety vest, and you safety goggles, and you give them a weed whacker, and you say, all right, you cut from here to there, you cut from that's all right for that. But if one is looking at a jazz festival, particularly within the Caribbean space, where lots of islands and lots of other countries have tried it in a sense of as part of a holistic tourism marketing scheme, then you must take a long-term, futuristic view of your festival. The first thing you have to decide is how are you branding and positioning your festival. And I always say, and I always give credit to CL Financial for the first 3 years when they were managing the Plymouth Jazz, they immediately positioned and marketed and branded that event as basically the premier, music event in the Caribbean because of the high caliber of the acts that they delivered, within that 3-day period. It was, it's phenomenal quality. You saw persons like Sting, you had P. Diddy, you had, you just name
Stevie
it. They
Wonder,
were there
Natalie
for that.
Cole.
You had Shakira, you had Elton John. They brought, when I tell you, top draw acts. As a result, and I attended every one, so I can tell you, you had persons who would fly from all over the world to come to Tobago for that jazz festival. So, in other words, you had set a standard that was really up there in terms of your positioning, your branding, your marketing. Other people from other Caribbean islands would plan for the Plymouth Jazz because it had set such a standard. Now, unfortunately, and I had spoken about it at the time, when CL said, well, look, we can't do it anymore and we wish to hand it over, my suggestion was, hey, listen, let the THA simply pay CL Financial to keep managing it for them. Because, in other words, you've already set the standard. You have the template, but that was not done, and the THA took it over. And since then, unfortunately, and, this is not a criticism, per se, but the reality is the festival has been in decline and in a tailspin since then. And, so therefore, your branding has been lost, your recognition has been lost, your value, your positioning has been lost. So if it is that we are seeking to try to rebrand, reposition, re-image the festival. It may be, okay, and I'm telling you this because if you look at St. Lucia, you recognize that after 25 years of their jazz festival, they have decided it's time for them to also rebrand.
Martin
so
George?
This year, St. Lucia does not have their traditional jazz festival.
Martin George, I'm so sorry, but we have to go to news right now. Yes, so sorry about that.
Okay,
Thank you.
All right.
Edison Carr, Jesse May Venture, and Dr. Wayne Haywood is on the Breakfast Roundtable on Sky 99.5 FM.